Have you ever heard of abandoned water parks? Places that were once filled with laughter, now swallowed by silence and decay. What could turn a bustling summer paradise into a graveyard of broken rides and stagnant pools? Why have so many children gone missing here, never to return? And why is the park's last caretaker still there, nearly 20 years later? If you're ready to uncover the truth, don't forget to like the video, leave a comment, and subscribe to the channel for more chilling stories. Get comfortable, but not too comfortable, because this story might haunt you long after it's over. I am the sole remaining employee of an abandoned water park. The summer I got a job here, I was 17, and it was a good year. Ellen Ditzworth used to work the hot dog stand, and we'd sneak cigarettes under the beams of the Dragon Slayer ride, cringing and giggling as the cars went overhead, dripping water all over us. Wet hands and damp cigarettes. But it was near her station, and I think she found it funny to get splashed. It was out of the way, too. It was always quiet and cool down there, even in the summer heat. If any of the ride-goers smelled our cigarette smoke as they hurtled overhead, they didn't say anything. One time, when we fumbled around and flirted, I kissed her fingers, and they smelled like an ashtray. I still think about it to this day. I was 22 when they offered me the winter job. Ellen was long gone by then. No more bright red short shorts and poorly shaven legs that she'd invite me to stroke under the pretense of showing just how bad she was with a razor. There were other girls, but by the time the final summer rolled around, I'd long felt uncomfortable hanging out with new hires. Sometimes I'd stand there listening to them talk, and I'd feel lonelier than I had when I was by myself. I was thinking about my future around this time when the manager told me he had an opportunity for me to make good cash. They needed someone to stick around and keep the place ticking while everyone went back to the real world. Usual guy had walked, and they needed someone bad. Last day before the park shut for winter was always Halloween, and that was only because it had a fireworks show. After that, it turned into a ghost town, and I'd be on my own. I'd get a trailer to sleep in, and I could use my own car to get to the closest shop. The park would pay some of my gas. Not all of it, but enough to help out. Only real problem was I'd be alone. Not that the place was a desert island. There were 2 towns within easy driving distance, and I could have friends around so long as we didn't mess with the rides. But other than that, I'd be the only staff member on hand for the entire 4 months. Security guard and janitor rolled into one. I agreed, but I told him when the park reopened in March, I'd be done. I figured it was time to move on. Get a degree like some of my friends had. Or maybe my dad could help me out with a job somewhere. World was wide open to me, and I figured I'd sit on my ass all winter, make a shit ton on overtime, and then go on to some new adventure where I'd meet another Ellen Ditzworth or two. Yesterday I turned 38 and I'm still in the park. Government signs my checks now. Couldn't tell you when that happened exactly. Probably after the media got wind of Denise Surrey, who broke in with her friends and never left. A lot of kids have gone missing here over the years, but she was the one who went mainstream. Her parents were doctors and she had blue eyes, so she got just enough attention to get the news cameras out. When the fuss died and the media moved on to its next story, some government guys came and installed 8-foot steel palisade fences. Gave me the keys to the only gate and scarpered real quick. Gave me a funny feeling seeing 4 men in suits, barrel-chested with pistols on their hips, climb into an unmarked vehicle and accelerate out the parking lot so fast the back of the car fishtailed. One of them looked over his shoulder at the park, and he was so scared it was like he was looking at a mushroom cloud. I was the one who found Denise. She'd gone crawling head-first down the Astro Missile water slide, one of those up-and-down kind of slides that have you bouncing along on a padded dinghy. Rides like that are usually open top, but this had long sections in a closed tunnel with LED lights to look like stars. Thing is, depending on weight, some people would catch air and hit the top of those tunnels going 20 miles per hour, maybe more. We used to take turns going in there to pull out any teeth that had got stuck in the roof. 15 years later, and that tunnel mouth looked like something out of a nightmare. Fairy moss covering the opening. Darkness inside heavier than the night around it. Bone dry and with no obvious way to safety. Denise died of thirst. They think she was in there for 6 days, crawling around in the pitch black looking for an exit that should never have been more than 100 feet away. There were signs something was wrong with this place back when it was still open. I just didn't register them. There were the injuries and accidents that are common in every water park, But we had a couple hundred serious ones every year, usually one a day. Tried to mitigate it with safety measures, but half the time they didn't work. Radios would bug out when you'd try sending a warning. Repair guys would get lost, calling up angry saying the road just kept going right forever and they'd had enough of this shit. Out-of-order signs would go missing. Sometimes kids would insist some staff member had waved them through on a closed attraction. They'd be so adamant I started to believe them. I think the manager did too. He made it policy to have name tags on us at all times, and if the kids said whoever gave them the go-ahead didn't have one on, he'd tell us all to forget it, like it wasn't even worth trying to figure out who needed a disciplinary. I had it happen once where I radioed to the guy at the top of one slide and told him to stop any kids coming down. The last one had come out bleeding and looking unresponsive, and I wanted to check on him. I remember pulling him out of the water and looking at this boy all slack and pale as a sheet of paper with blue lips, so fucking cold it hurt just to hold him. And I wondered if I was holding someone dead when out of nowhere another kid slammed into me so hard I went under. Scared me shitless because for a second or two it was like I couldn't see the surface of the pool, almost like there wasn't one, just blue forever and ever. Before I could start to panic, my feet found the floor and I surfaced only to see the kid I'd been holding seconds ago standing there looking worried. He was the picture of good health. Asked if I was okay, said sorry for hitting me when he came out the slide, but really it was my own dumbass fault for standing there in the first place. Guy at the top swore on his life he'd never got any radio message from me. I put it all down to the head injury, which was bad enough the owner made someone drive me to the emergency room. Looking back, I'm pretty sure it was the park having its fun with me. Could have been worse. You could say it likes to play tricks, but those tricks are mean as hell, and over the years they've only got worse. Despite all I've told you so far, the first winter alone wasn't as bad as you might think. Creepy as hell walking around all those rides that were usually so busy and full of life. Tarpaulins pulled across all those pools, big and small, moving with gentle susurrations in the icy winds. It wasn't great in the day, overcast and dreary, the air seemingly blue, but at night it was even worse. I made those rounds quickly, stopping sometimes to summon what little bravery I had to shine a light in the pitch-black toilets, or to check one of the changing stalls dotted around the place. Things went missing a lot, moved around. Once one of the rides came to life at 3 a.m., and I woke to the sound of tinny music echoing throughout the park. But winter came and went without any real incident. First day the park reopened, I went to see the manager and slipped in some water. Broke my left arm and did a number on my back. Owner was so scared of being sued, he threw money at me. Told me he'd cover the medical bills and sit me up in my trailer and pay me to do nothing. Nothing. What was I gonna do? I'd arranged to start another job on a construction site in a few weeks, and there was no hope of me doing that kind of work with my injuries. I needed money and had no other way of making it. I agreed to stick around until I felt better, but unfortunately I never felt better. Winter soon rolled around again and the same deal as last time was back on the table. He needed someone on site and I needed money. I took it thinking another few months in the park wasn't so bad. I was wrong. Second time round was a lot worse. Part of it was me. 23 years old and with a bad back, drinking most nights and struggling with the prescription painkillers. Spent most days haunted by the strange feeling that my life's honeymoon phase was over. Hardly any friends accepted my invite to come spend a couple weeks, and those that did weren't around long. Couldn't tell you if that was just us growing apart, as friends often do, or the park's strange influence. Dave came round with his girlfriend for a couple nights. She grouched the whole time. Hated sleeping in the trailer while I stayed in a tent outside. But she hated the park too. Said she felt watched all the time. Trip was cut short when we found her screaming one morning. She was pointing at one of the slides saying something had come out of it and was in the pool swimming around. But when we looked, we didn't see nothing. She did have a hell of a bite on her ankle though. Funny shape to it. Dave looked at it and got real freaked out. They left in a hurry. Another car's tires screeching as it hauled ass out of here at top speeds. Never did figure out what happened, but if she didn't like the park, well, I guess it didn't like her either. Not that I was much safer. Found myself getting cut up like crazy doing basic odd jobs. Things broke all the time. even if they'd been fine for years and years. And then one night I came into my trailer to find a drowned possum on the little kitchen table. Poor thing was soaked in chlorine water that dripped onto the floor in a puddle. No marks going to or from it, like it just appeared there out of thin air. It stank like hell, though. It had clearly been dead for days and days. I gingerly dropped it into a garbage bag using a pair of tongs and threw the lot in a dumpster, but I still couldn't spend more than a few seconds in the trailer without gagging, so I slept in the tent instead. Pitched it as close as I could without picking up that smell, but I had a bad feeling the whole time I set it up, like I was being watched. By the time I was climbing inside, it was midnight, and I was desperate to get to sleep and see the cold night turn to day. Barely an hour later, and I had to climb back out of the tent because the trailer door was banging in the wind. Okay, I told myself, as I shuffled over in my tighty-whities, arms wrapped around my chest for warmth. That's my own stupid fault for leaving it open. I closed it in a hurry and went back to the tent, but stopped dead in my tracks when I saw the zipper was pulled shut. I hadn't left it like that. I didn't know what to do. My brain went in two directions at the same time. One said I was mistaken. I had closed the tent and just forgotten it. The other said something or someone had crawled inside and was waiting for me. It had set the whole thing up as a trap, and the best thing to do was to get in my car and drive until the sun rose. But I was already half cut and knew I shouldn't be driving. The skeptical half of my brain made an appealing case. The world isn't a nightmare, it said. It can look like one sometimes, but it isn't real. If you hear a bump in the night, you go looking and find it was all nothing, and you take a deep breath, laugh at yourself for getting scared, and move on. Still, it took everything I had just to take a step towards the tent, and I shone my light at it, hoping to see some sign of something in there. By the time my hand was on the zipper, I was shaking like a leaf and rethinking my ethical code of not driving drunk. But when emotions get that high, it's like you run on autopilot. Must be a survival thing. I opened the flap without really telling myself to, and then I was looking inside my tent and there was nothing there. I crawled inside quick as I could, pulled the zipper back the other way and tried to go to sleep. I settled down for maybe another 30 minutes when something's hand pressed against the tent wall, and that was when I started screaming. The way it came at me. Palm open, fingers spread, tent fabric stretching to near breaking point. Makes my skin crawl just to remember it. Long fingers that tapered to a point, almost razor sharp, and a palm not much larger than a golf ball, even if the fingers spanned a dinner plate. In the nightmare reality of the moment, I saw it the way I might see a spider. Equal parts disgust and terror. I had to get away, and I backed up so fast I wound up rolling the whole tent like a hamster ball. Lost the zipper in the panic. Didn't find it again until the last scream finally left my lips and I was forced to catch my breath in the silence of an empty night, accepting that whatever was out there was either laughing its ass off at me or waiting patiently. Either way, I was at its mercy. Only thing I could do was collect myself and leave the damn tent. When I finally climbed free, there was no one waiting for me. Only a couple wet footprints going to the nearest pool. I considered pulling the tarpaulin back and looking, but I was already scared shitless and had no courage remaining. Instead, I ran into the trailer, slammed the door shut, barricaded it with every last piece of furniture that wasn't bolted to the floor, and fell asleep with the smell of rotten meat filling my lungs. Come morning, I was thankful for the sunlight and the feeling that last night's events were just a dream. After that, I locked my trailer door every night, and I never slept in that tent again. No more possums, but it isn't uncommon for me to find scratches and dents in my door each morning. Nothing serious, but looks to me like the probing of a curious animal. A couple days later, something locked me in the boys' bathroom near the east end of the park. I'd only gone in 'cause one of the faucets was running. I'd just turned it off when the door slammed shut and I couldn't get it open again. Had to kick the lock out, which isn't an easy thing to do. First kick, I nearly broke my ankle. Second time hurt just as bad, and I had to take a breather to cope with the pain. Found myself pacing and occasionally stopping to listen for any sign of someone waiting for me outside. Someone I could shout at, blame it all on. Anything to keep the anger churning and not let it turn to fear. It was a full hour before I got panicked enough to give it my all and finally broke the lock. Burst into the cold air, all red-faced and flustered, and found the park silent as a graveyard. Just those tarpaulins waving gently in the breeze. I learned some important lessons that winter. If you feel watched, feel like you're walking into a situation someone planned, it's because you are. When the park reopened, I was out of there without a moment's hesitation. Finally got that job on a construction site, and it lasted all of 3 weeks before I hurt my back again. Spent the rest of the summer laid up on my dad's sofa drinking and watching daytime TV. Got a call off the manager around August, and he told me it had been a bad summer. Not only had the cops been sniffing around like crazy because some poor kid went missing in the area, but they'd had twice as many injuries as before. Said he'd just spent the day in court hearing testimony from the parents of some kid who'd never walk or feed himself again after he hit his head on one of the rides. He sounded pretty beat up about it. He wasn't the best boss, but it wasn't like we worked for Mr. Burns either. Poor guy was way out of his depth. Anyway, part of the court settlement was he had to have staff members on site 24/7. I'd done it twice before, and he was desperately in need of someone who knew the job. I nearly said no, but he told me it was me or some 17-year-old lifeguard who'd shown interest in the job, and I didn't like the thought of that. God help me, I accepted. And when I went back that third time, I took a gun. And this time I trusted my instincts. If I walked past a changing stall and heard the shower running, I let it run. Hour later, it'd be turned off again. If I saw someone had left the lights on in the staff room, I let them stay on until morning when I could deal with it in the comfort of daylight. Flushing toilets, wet footprints, open doors. I learned to stop sweating the little things, and 9 times out of 10, they went away on their own. Pretty soon, I found myself laughing at them. A big fat wallet sitting in the middle of a solitary lounger that had been dragged into the moonlight. A phone ringing from somewhere in the depths of a maintenance hatch. Those kinds of crude tricks weren't going to work on me, I decided. Thought I had it all figured out and there was nothing left for that place to show me. And then the park ate a drifter. Or something did anyway. Did it right in front of me too. I'd found the guy sleeping in one of the brick and mortar bathrooms. We gotta keep those things warm enough to stop the pipes bursting, so I guess they make decent enough shelter. He was an agitated old fuck. Called me all sorts as I told him to clear off. He didn't make for the main exit though. Wasn't like he'd parked a car in the lot, was it? Instead, he just made a beeline for the nearby hills. No fences in that part of the park back then, only open fields moving into woodland. His plan was to just walk into the wilderness in the middle of winter, and I wondered if I was actually marching some guy to a cold death. I remember looking at his shoes and seeing the backs of his heels exposed, and I realized I couldn't let him do that. Snow was due to fall that night, and I knew it was going to get real bad out there. "Hey," I cried out while slowing to a stop. "Look, man, it's late, I'm sure." My words died out. I didn't really know what to say when he turned to face me. He was angry and tired, and I knew he wasn't ever really going to be thankful for some randomer's charity, but that didn't mean I shouldn't try. For a moment, the only sound was the tarpaulin of the large pool to our right. Was just about to cough up some more words when his feet went sideways. His body rotated around his center of mass, and the next part of him to touch solid ground was his head. It made a noise that makes my teeth ache just to think about. A percussive, almost musical note that really shouldn't be made by a human skull. The blood that sprayed across the tiles reminded me of when I'd go paintballing with my friends. I remember looking down at it and noticing a couple loose teeth. Strange feeling. For a few seconds, everything turned to a kind of white noise, as ancient instincts rooted me to the spot with fear. Paralyzed me. Million thoughts went through my head. The guy was dead. Something had taken him. That blood used to be inside of him. I have blood inside of me. Does my blood look like that? These thoughts were like the sparks that fly off a loose electrical wire, but I was stuck mired in them until the whistling in my ears faded, and I heard something being dragged across the floor. The guy hadn't even gone that far. He'd flown about 8 feet and landed just on the edge of the pool. His legs were in the water, hidden behind the tarpaulin, and only his top half was on dry land. His head was a ruin of blood and matted hair, but he still managed to look at me for just a moment before he slid the rest of the way below the water with a quiet splunk. The realization he was alive kicked my ass into my gear, and I ran over to the circuit box and hit the button that pulls back the pool cover. Machine ran loud as it drew the blue heavy sheet back across the water. Felt like eternity waiting for it. When it was finally over and I could look down into the water and see clearly, there was no one there. Not even a cloud of blood polluting the pool. Nothing. I felt like I was going insane, and I even looked over and double-checked that the guy's plastic bag was still where he'd dropped it, just so I could be sure I hadn't made the entire thing up. I really didn't know what to do. The only thing in that water were a couple leaves that had made it in there over fall, but that was it. And then I saw it. I can't explain it easily. It was a sudden overlap of realities, a bit like the hollow cube illusion where it can be two things at once. Without ever taking my eyes off it, that pool became every deep body of water I'd ever seen. All of them, all at once. It was every calm and glassy ocean surface with rays of diffuse light leading into unseen depths. Every lake with murky kelp fingers reaching up out of the dark. Every flooded basement with black and brackish water. I could smell the stagnant water. Could feel the breeze you get standing on the coast. Taste the salt. All of it at once. And something moved in those infinite waters, and it was big. It was like the first time I saw the Grand Canyon big. Like when you get on a plane and see the ground pull away so quickly it loses perspective. Whatever was down there was coming right at me, and I'm not ashamed to say I pissed my pants. An ocean full of stars was down there, and the thing swimming towards me had a body that obscured entire nebulae. I felt vertigo come over me, and I backed away and I slipped in the blood, and then I woke up a few hours later and started screaming. I had to clean up in the morning, and I had to pull the tarpaulin back across. Machine only goes one way, so I had to do it with a pool stick, and it made me feel sick just to go near it. Every time I got close, I started to feel dizzy again. When I finally mustered the courage to look, there was the same old pool it had always been. But I'd never shake the feeling I had when I was looking down in it and saw teeth like tectonic plates. When summer rolled back round, I saw a bunch of kids in that pool and had to go be sick in a bush. The thought of them sharing space with that thing. Jesus. After that, I felt like I belonged to the park, weird as it sounds. Manager didn't have to fight me to get me to stick around for a fourth winter, or a fifth or sixth. The rest of the world didn't feel so real to me anymore. Sitting and eating dinner with my father while he lectured me on my prospects. Getting a beer with an old friend who was passing through. I felt like I'd gone into fucking space and seen the world was flat, and now I had to just come on back and pretend like I cared about whether my soda was diet or not. Not long after that, the park had its last ever summer. It had gone too far by that point. Government was looking to close it all down on account of the accidents, and the manager was down the station every other day for questioning. 4 kids missing that year alone. I found one of them folded up inside a pool filter, but didn't report it on account of not wanting the attention. The rest I don't know about. I was told I'd be paid another month or so after closure until a demolition crew came in, but no one ever arrived. Just me, this place, and a back that's getting worse with each new winter. I don't patrol at night anymore. Little by little, the park has become something unfamiliar to me. Grass growing up between old tiles. Pool water the color of cut grass and engine oil. Even in the day, you can see things moving around down there, and the smell of chlorine no longer fills the air. Now it's the heavy stench of rotten algae and dead water, and sometimes the tang of the salty ocean that I've learned to avoid like the plague. Makes me see stars in the corner of my vision, and I don't like it. My dreams are bad enough. Drowning in the dark, something huge bearing down on me. I've woken up more than a few times and vomited up salt water. I can't bring myself to think what any of it means because I just don't want to know. Last time I went in the park after dark, I had a close call. Worst of my life. I've been thinking about leaving ever since, but I worry there's not much else out there for me at this stage. That, and I kind of feel guilty I didn't save all those kids with the cameras. Urban explorers they call themselves, and I say kids, but really they were college students who record videos for something called TikTok. Anyway, they came prepared. Scouted the park, even scouted me, working out my routine and where my trailer is so they could avoid my general line of sight. I had no clue they'd watched me for a whole day. Once they figured I was passed out or asleep, they drove their van as close to the fence they could find, climbed the top, and hopped on over. For about an hour, they got what they wanted. I've watched the footage 100 times. Broken down toilets covered in graffiti, smashed windows and broken glass covering the floor, old pools full of ancient water covered in thick, brackish scum. You can hear the glee in their voices. That kind of urban decay was their bread and butter. And they were good at it too. They stayed quiet, didn't shout or break anything. They just filmed. Wasn't until they decided to try rowing out to the castle that things took a turn. I came too late. What got me out of bed was a scream, maybe a few of them. It was blurry and I came to around 3 a.m., and still a little tipsy, my head foaming at the edges with a half-remembered dream of a hollow world filled with water. As soon as I saw the van, I realized someone had gotten inside the park, and I hadn't just been dreaming the sounds of splashing water and panicked. But by the time I went in there myself, the place was silent. I really didn't want to search it at night. I hadn't gone in there after dark for a few years, and things had only gotten worse. Set something off inside me. A kind of spiritual Geiger counter is how I think of it. An intense primordial warning system that made the shadows around me look almost infinitely deep. More than that, I guess, it felt alien. Sounds stupid, but it really did feel like I wasn't on the same planet anymore. I don't know. That part might just be all in my head, but that's how it felt that night. I'd pushed myself just about as far as I was willing to go when I heard it. A rhythmic, hollow knocking. It was coming from one of the largest pools in the park. A shallow, kid-friendly one we called the Castle because it had a giant jungle gym in the center. A kind of spaghetti mess of platforms and climbing bars and slides that the kids loved. I followed the sound and saw a pile of rucksacks and even a large camera on the very edge of the pool, and there, just a couple meters away, was a rowboat. The idiots had brought it with them. Probably thought they were being smart by avoiding the water below. At least they'd tied it off so it was easy for me to pull back in. I gave it a cursory inspection, shivering at the mere thought of floating across that nightmare water in something so flimsy, and was ready to leave it until the morning when I heard a quiet splashing. Something had climbed out the water, and my heart dropped as I instinctively flicked the torchlight towards the sound of dripping water and saw a thin, shivering shape climb onto the lowest steps of the castle. It looked gray and sickly, and then it started whimpering, and I realized I was looking at a girl. College-aged, with stringy hair and an outfit that might have been colorful before she'd gone in the water, but now it was just the color of ash and moss. At a glance, she almost didn't look human anymore. She looked more like a starving animal. Shell-shocked and shaking. I shouted out to her, but it was as if she couldn't hear me. She dragged herself up onto a dry platform and curled up in a ball in the far corner, knees pulled to her chest, and wide eyes locked into a 1,000-yard stare. And something was in that water. It came close to the surface, displacing small branches and causing the thick pond scum to bulge but never break. From the looks of things, it was circling the castle, and in some parts where the algae wasn't so thick, I got the faintest glimpse of colorless scales the size of my hand and a thick, muscular trunk. Sometimes it seemed to bump up against the castle, like it knew the girl was nearby, but it didn't know how to get to her. The whole thing shook and she'd whimper extra loud, but she still didn't show any signs of becoming lucid. I'd be lying if I said I didn't think about leaving her until morning. She was unresponsive and looked like she was just going to stay in the same place. Wouldn't it be better to just go get her when the sun was up? I thought. But that was a pretty fucked up thing to think. She wasn't safe there. I wasn't safe just standing in sight of the water, and she was on some old piece of plastic held together with rusting bolts. What if it collapsed? What if something came out of the water? God knows it could happen. Something had touched my tent all those years ago. Who's to say it wouldn't walk on out to take her? At some point I made the decision. Don't know exactly what did it, but I think it was the sound she was making. That, and the knowledge she'd been in there. God knows what she'd seen. I had to have sympathy. She needed help, and I was the only one around who could give it. So once something deep inside me clicked, I knew I had to move quickly before the fear started to fuck with my head. I grabbed the rope and began to pull the boat towards me. I wasn't sure what would happen. half expected something to breach the water like a hungry shark and swallow the boat whole. But instead, whatever was circling the castle just slunk into the depths and stayed out of sight. Somehow that was even worse, and I found myself scanning the water obsessively as I worked up the courage to get into the boat. I tried to keep the momentum, though. I didn't let myself start thinking or doubting myself. I just climbed in awkwardly, 1 foot at a time, damn near shitting myself when the whole thing wobbled, and I briefly felt like I was going to lose my balance. But I managed it, and soon I was sitting down and using the oars to pull myself through the water. As I rowed, my brain moved along in different directions. Part of me was almost watching myself, like from above, and asking over and over, "What the fuck are you doing?" While another watched that water for the slightest sign of life, and a third part of my brain was watching me for signs I was going to crumble from the adrenaline and ice-cold fear coursing through my veins. Each time the oars broke the water, I kept waiting to see something coming after me, and I was about halfway there when I realized that if it was big enough, it could just bowl the whole boat over like a shark knocking a surfer off his board. It was too far to turn back when I saw the water rise in the distance. Again, it didn't break the surface, but it came close and sent a couple waves rolling across the entire pool where they lapped against the distant edge. They made the whole boat rock side to side like it was just a bit of driftwood. When the bulge in the water appeared again, it was on the other side of the boat, and I made the terrible decision to stop rowing and look over the edge. There was no bottom to the pool, but whatever was down there wasn't swallowing continents anytime soon, at least. Hard to pin size down, but based on the steely blue fins that slid by close beneath me, that didn't really matter. It could eat me easy enough, and that was all that mattered. Hell, I wasn't even sure if it was a fish or a squid or something else entirely, but I was pretty sure it still had a mouth somewhere in that murk. It gave the boat a gentle knock. Nothing serious. Not enough to roll it, but enough to let me know it was interested in me. I decided I couldn't just stay there floating in one place forever. I had to move. I grabbed the oars and threw all caution to the wind. The sooner I got off that water, the better. Sure, I'd have to figure out how to get back, but that was a problem for later. Right there and then, all that mattered was the rising terror and disgust that took all my strength to keep from bubbling up into full-blown panic. As soon as the boat began to move, the creature slid out of view again. Didn't know if I ought to be relieved or even more afraid, but I took advantage of the lull in its activity to close the distance, and, once close enough, I pulled the boat over to the same steps the girl had climbed. Once there, I secured it with a bit of the rope and hopped onto the first step, cringing at the way the ice-cold water felt slick and slimy against my ankles. The girl flinched at my touch, but she didn't scream or pull away. I told her it'd be okay, or something like that. Tried my best to sound reassuring. Tried to let her know I was going to get her somewhere safe. I managed to pull her to her feet when she finally turned and looked right past me. I barely existed to her at that moment. She only had eyes for the water behind me. Something about the look on her face gave me pause, though. She wasn't scanning for danger. She was looking right at something, and before I had a chance to look for myself, she started screaming. When I saw it, I wanted to scream too. I'd never seen anything like it, or since. A head like seaweed, a face like a scallop. It watched us with an almost casual interest that frightened me more than any predatory scowl. The look of a child about to pull a spider's legs off. The thought of it still makes my skin crawl. It was so still, so alien, I couldn't help but pause and wonder if I was looking at something real or if it was just bad special effects. And yet the moment stretched on, until something in that unknowable mind made a decision and the creature disappeared back beneath the water. I made a decision too, and I dragged the young woman to the nearby boat where she started to fight me the moment she saw it. Can't say I blame her. Last time she was on it, she'd nearly died, but there was no third option. It was stay and die or take our chances getting to safety. Unfortunately, we had barely gotten within a meter of the thing when the whole boat was blown sky high with tremendous force. For a few seconds, I stood there dumbstruck, the girl crying, and water falling from the sky like a momentary rainstorm. When the boat finally returned to Earth, it was a couple 100 meters away and hit dry land with a great crash. My stomach sank. How the hell were we going to get off the castle now? Not a moment later, and the entire structure began to shake. By now, the girl was close to hysterics, and I wasn't far behind. I took her hand and began to look for some high ground as that thing began to shake and batter the flimsy plastic supports that held the platform up. We were forced to climb up towards the plastic roof of the tallest tower, which wasn't exactly all that high up, but it was the best we could do. The bars leading to it weren't easy to navigate, and at one point I slipped and fell backwards, striking my chin painfully and looking up to see the girl going ahead without me. For a moment I nearly gave up, but then there was the sound of something snapping, and the entire castle began to slide on one side. I looked down and saw black water rising up to meet me. The thought of sinking into that filth ignited something inside me, and I scrambled up the last few rungs and perched on top of the smooth plastic cover of the castle's highest turret. It was barely large enough for us both to sit on, but it was all we had. Looking back, I can't help but laugh. I make it sound like a great tower, but it was barely 12 feet off the ground. As soon as I was up there looking down, water quickly bubbling towards us, I realized just how badly we were fucked. We'd delayed our inevitable death by mere seconds at most. By the time the bright red piece of plastic we clung to hit the water, the castle had broken apart, so all its little pieces went floating in different directions. Ours was the last to go in, and it went down beneath our collective weight until the water reached our waists. And then it came back up, buoyant and hollow. It was no boat, but it came damn close. "Paddle!" I cried at the girl, and she did. And we pulled ourselves through the water to the nearest edge. Pretty soon, the makeshift raft bumped up against the tiled wall, and we were dragging ourselves up onto dry land where she rolled onto her back. I continued to crawl for another few meters until I felt like I was far away enough from the water. Only once I felt safe, I let myself collapse and lay crying and laughing for what felt like hours. But the girl only cried. At first a whimper, then a sob, and then a howl. A painful, gut-wrenching scream that made my own joy wilt until I could do nothing except listen to the raw grief in her voice. When I sat up to see if she was okay, she was sitting upright and staring at the thing that was rising out of the water. Again, no malice. Not really. At least I don't think so. It'd be like looking for a recognizable expression on an oyster, but it did watch us calmly as it ate what I can only assume was one of her friends. A man, I think. Hard to remember details. He didn't cry, but he did look at us for help that we couldn't give. I'm not sure I could even tell you how it ate him, but it looked painful and slow. Reminiscent of a starfish, I think. At some point the girl passed out, and not long after so did I. I doubt she ever made a full recovery. The only thing she managed to say, even hours later after the paramedics had sedated her and I'd finished giving my less than truthful statement to police, were the words, "the stars," over and over. I think a lot about how changed I was when I first looked down into that water and saw the abyss below, but that poor girl was actually in it. She'd swam in those waters, submerged. I don't even know how she came back from an ocean that doesn't have a surface, but she did, and somehow I don't think she'll ever be the same. But it's got me thinking about myself. About what I've lost to it. Jesus Christ, I'll be 40 before I know it, and what then? Just gonna wait here forever and ever. There's a number on the back of my paychecks, and I want to try calling it to find out more. Like, what would they do if I tried going somewhere else? Would they let me? Because it's gone. The days of Ellen Ditzworth are gone. The days of a good back and strong legs are gone. The person I was before I saw that drifter die is gone. Yesterday is gone. The past is a shared hallucination. Only the present is real. I need to get out of here before I lose more of myself. I'm never going to understand this place. I realize that now. I can only accept that it exists and try to move on, which I should have done the day I saw those stars. Because there is an abyss and it doesn't flow through time like we do. Doesn't occupy space like we do, but it's there and it's full of gods the way a koi pond is full of fish. And I'm worried the more I think about it, the worse the park gets, and the closer I get to falling into waters that have no up or down, and which never ever end. In my dreams, I am choking in the acidic bile of a creature that swallowed me whole. I'm worried that if I stay here much longer, I'll forget how to wake up. My daughter is missing. I don't want you to find her. I've always wanted to be a mother. I remember when I was in kindergarten, all the kids were supposed to share what they wanted to be when they grew up. Most kids said things like firefighter, astronaut, doctor, cat doctor, etc. I said, mother. My teacher, Miss Moss, told me I could be a mother as well as something else and urged me to pick another dream job. I honestly couldn't think of one, but because all the other kids were staring at me, I blurted out, teacher. That made Miss Moss smile, but it made me feel bad because I knew I was lying to her. I've always hated lying to people. That's why I am going to tell you the truth. I promise. I always knew I was going to be a mother, but never in a million years could I ever have imagined I'd have a daughter like Freya. When was in my teens, I got my first serious boyfriend, Jack. I started birth control because I knew it was the responsible thing to do. Logically, I knew I wasn't ready to be a mother, but I still couldn't help the feeling of despair that washed over me each time I swallowed another pill. Emotionally, it felt so wrong, putting this barrier between myself and my longest-held dream. Sometimes I'd even cry. These feelings became especially acute when Jack and I decided to get married. I wanted to start our family immediately, but Jack wanted us to finish university and get settled in our careers before talking about kids. I agreed that was the logical thing to do. I kept swallowing those pills while pouring my longing into journals. I'd make lists of baby names and dream about who my child would grow up to be. Would they want to be a doctor? Or perhaps an investigative journalist? Maybe their greatest desire would be to be a parent, like me. I followed mommy bloggers online, memorizing their tips and tricks so I'd be ready to be the best mom ever, simultaneously wondering if my family would be as perfect as theirs. But I honestly wasn't looking for perfection. I just wanted to have a happy kid who would feel loved as their unique self. I knew whoever arrived, I was ready to love them to the stars and back. I was going to be the best mom. I knew I would be. Finally, Jack and I were ready to start our family, but it turned out harder than I had expected. Much harder. Months turned into years, and every negative test hit like a knockout punch. It never got easier. It probably didn't help that I was still following those perfect mommy bloggers with their perfect families. So I started following others who were sharing about their fertility journeys, people who were struggling as much as me. That helped me start sharing my own experiences. It felt so good knowing that I wasn't alone. It felt like being a part of this amazing community of people I had never met. Each time a fellow struggler finally found success, we all congratulated them joyfully. But alone, with Jack, I'd cry. I was tired of waiting for my turn. I know this wasn't only taking a toll on me. Jack was struggling too. One day, while I was crying in his arms, he asked me, "If we aren't able to have kids, would a life with just the two of us be so bad?" My silence was enough for us both to understand my answer to that. Jack and I decided to use all of our savings to try IVF. The process was tough emotionally and physically. Injections, ultrasounds, waiting, but it all felt worth it to me. Then finally, it happened. I was pregnant. The world finally felt like it made sense to me. Jack and I were overjoyed. I felt like I was walking on fluffy white clouds. That was before I knew what was coming. We found out I was carrying a boy. We named him Oliver. But then, during a routine ultrasound, everything changed. The technician's silence and the doctor's grave expression told us what we didn't want to hear. Something was wrong. Those fluffy white clouds I had been walking on. They became dark storm clouds that surrounded me for the rest of the pregnancy. We knew our son wasn't going to live long after his birth. In the end, one day was all we got with our perfect boy. I loved him to the stars and back, and I still do. I just wish I could have done something more to give him more time. I couldn't help but feel I had failed him as a mother. The next days, weeks, months, passed in a haze of grief so heavy I didn't know how we'd survive it. The nursery we'd so joyfully prepared now felt like a cruel joke. Silence felt deafening, and any noise was the wrong noise. I'd like to say that our relationship grew stronger through our shared grief, but it didn't. I wanted to start trying for another baby. I thought it would help us step forward out of the darkness we had felt trapped in. I thought it would be good for us to have something to look forward to. But Jack said he wasn't ready. He said we had to build back up our savings. It didn't take me long to get him to admit that, actually. The main reason was that he was scared about having another sick child. Jack packed his bag to stay at a hotel for a night. He said he just needed a bit of space. He never moved back. Somehow, in the midst of all this, I found myself back online, sharing my story. The responses poured in. Messages of love and shared pain. Messages I clung on to with desperation, as if each were a lifeline. I was in the bleakest part of my life, and those lifelines were essential. To make things even worse, I couldn't keep up with the mortgage, so had to list our house for sale. I shared all of this to my followers. Now I wonder, if I'd never shared anything online, would my daughter even exist? I think it was because I shared my story that the New Genesis Institute found me. Maybe Dr. Hart did personally read my posts, or maybe an algorithm pointed them towards who they were looking for. A desperate woman who would give anything, do anything for a child. I don't know how they found me, but I know that Freya wouldn't exist without them. It was early on a Sunday morning when I received this email. We are thrilled to extend to you an invitation to participate in an exclusive opportunity at the New Genesis Institute, a private fertility clinic dedicated to pioneering the future of human health and wellness. After learning about your fertility challenges and the heartbreaking loss you've endured, we believe you are uniquely positioned to benefit from and contribute to the groundbreaking work at the New Genesis Institute. Your journey has resonated deeply with Dr. Evelyn Hart, whose mission is not only to support those facing struggles, but also to advance the science of preventative medicine for future generations. To access your official invitation, please first sign the required NDA. There was a link to an NDA. I was nervous about clicking anything. It looked legit, but was this really some sort of horrible scam? By doing a quick search online, I learned that the New Genesis Institute was funded by Dr. Evelyn Hart, a billionaire philanthropist who had been funding health initiatives for years. There were hardly any photos of her. Dr. Hart appeared notorious for staying away from the public eye, but her name was credited on numerous scientific journals. She seemed super impressive. Dr. Hart had made her fortune early in her career when she innovated a disease testing device now used in clinics around the world. I suddenly felt something I hadn't in a long time: excitement and hope. My heart started to beat fast in my chest. I decided to take the leap. I clicked the NDA. Heart racing now, I skimmed an extensive document. Gleaning it was meant to ensure that any and all information about the Institute would remain strictly confidential. I signed it swiftly and pressed submit. Then I was taken to my official invitation. I'll share it with you here, and yes, I do realize I am breaking my NDA, but I'm more than willing to risk all consequences to get this information out to everyone. Thank you for considering the New Genesis Institute, founded by renowned Dr. Evelyn Hart. The New Genesis Institute is at the forefront of revolutionary research in preventative medicine, with a focus on creating healthier and stronger generations. We are conducting a series of elite fertility treatments, designed not only to help women conceive, but to ensure that future children are born with optimal health to give them the best possible chance in life. Should you decide to take part in our program, you will receive personalized fertility treatments designed by Dr. Hart and her team, accommodation during your treatment and pregnancy at the New Genesis Institute, personalized health care for the duration of your participation, financial support for you and your child in the years of their development in exchange for participation in scheduled health monitoring for research purposes, the opportunity to contribute to a better future, ensuring that the next generation is equipped to thrive. This invitation is offered to a select few individuals and is fully funded by Dr. Hart's personal investment in the future of medicine. Your resilience and willingness to embrace new possibilities have made you an ideal candidate for our program. If you want to participate in our innovative fertility program, please RSVP at your earliest convenience. We look forward to the opportunity to welcome you to the new Genesis Institute. I stared at that letter for I don't know how long, reading it and rereading it and rereading it. Then suddenly, before I even realized I was making the decision, I was responding, "Thank you so much for reaching out. Yes, I would love to participate." Their response came quickly. I received an email with detailed instructions. A private car would pick me up on March 1st, followed by a flight to their facility. The email explained that the new Genesis Institute was located on a private island, a place that, from the photos in the email, looked more like a resort than a clinic. Towering palm trees and sparkling blue water surrounded white buildings that gleamed in the sunlight. It didn't seem real. But then again, no part of this whole situation felt real. It didn't bother me at the time that I couldn't find the institute on a map. They had detailed extreme secrecy in the NDA. Instead of being nervous, I preferred to embrace a dream of a different reality that took me away from my current depressing existence. Plus, it was perfect timing. I was looking for a rental starting March 1st, and as accommodation was included during my stay at the institute, I wouldn't have to worry about that. All I had to do is move all my stuff to a storage unit and let my life take me where it was going to take me. I had spent so many years trying to achieve a specific plan. Giving over to this felt right to me somehow. It felt like winning the lottery. I let that high feeling carry me to March 1st. When March 1st came, that was the first time I felt true fear. What if this was all a scam? Or worse, a joke? Was someone playing me? And if they were, why? But the car arrived precisely when it said it would, and it took me to an airport where I was welcomed onto a small plane. Apart from the crew, there were 2 other people on board, Claire and Mariah. I learned that they were also going to participate in Dr. Hart's treatment. On the flight, we got to know each other better. Claire and Mariah had very similar stories to my own. They both had trouble conceiving and didn't have the funds for any alternate route to motherhood. Claire was a widow. Her husband died of cancer, and Mariah was recently single. Mariah also had a child who had passed away in infancy. Neither of them had any other children, but desperately wanted them. We were all so excited about being selected by Dr. Hart for her program. Claire and Mariah agreed that the whole thing didn't seem real. But like me, they let their hope for a child lead their decision to make this epic leap of faith. The plane landed on a pristine airstrip. We were greeted by uniformed staff who smiled and greeted us as if they already knew us personally. An especially friendly staff member, Lark, took us under her wing. She escorted us towards the main building where we were told we'd be introduced to Dr. Hart. Touching my feet to that island, seeing those buildings, this is when things really started feeling real for me. The facility looked amazing. There were little cottages dotted around a larger main building. Lark told us that each of us would get our own cottage for the duration of our stay. Gardens weaved throughout. Lark explained that we were free to roam the grounds of the facility, but the north half of the island had eroding cliffs that were super dangerous. A border wall made a division between that part of the island and the facility, so as long as we didn't try to get over the wall, we'd be safe. Dr. Hart emerged from the main building to greet us. She was poised and magnetic, with piercing green eyes. They weren't unkind, but had a calculating quality to them. She seemed to be assessing us from the moment she laid eyes on us. She spoke with measured confidence. "Welcome. You've made the right choice coming here. I promise, we'll take excellent care of you." She urged us to explore the island and take time to get to know the other women we'd be going on this journey with. I learned there were 20 of us. Before we were permitted to start fertility treatment, we spent our days in group therapy sessions, sharing our stories, our hopes and fears. We came from different backgrounds, different countries even, but we all shared a unique bond. Every one of us were single, we had all suffered a tragic loss of a loved one, and we all had the seemingly impossible dream of motherhood. In the evenings, we'd wander the gardens or sit by the ocean. We'd often talk late into the night, bonding further over our excitement. But I realized that Mariah, who had seemed so excited about this opportunity on the plane, was growing increasingly nervous about being on the island. She didn't want to talk loudly about it, though. as she said we were probably being watched and listened to. She seemed scared of Dr. Hart. I kept looking for hidden cameras, but I couldn't see any. I told her she was just being paranoid. I assume now that Mariah was probably right, but then I was actually mad at her for putting a damper on everyone's excitement. Finally, the day arrived that we would be beginning treatment. We all gathered in the main building where Dr. Hart would be speaking to us. There we realized that our group of 20 was now 14. 6 women, including Mariah, were no longer there. Dr. Hart explained that there were a few women who were assessed as incompatible for the program, and so were returned home. Dr. Hart explained our treatment process in detail. They would be using innovative science that combined traditional IVF with advanced genetic optimization techniques. She told us she had made her fortune by diagnosing problems, but she wanted to fix them. You were selected, she said, because you understand the anguish that comes with seeing a loved one held back by nothing but their own biology. You want a better life for your children. Not only will we be ensuring you conceive, we will also be ensuring your child has the strongest possible biological foundation. A healthier, brighter future for all humanity begins here. She told us that if anyone was uncomfortable with proceeding, they were welcome to step out and they would be flown home. She also made it clear that choosing to stay would mean we'd be leaving with a child. There was no question in my mind. I was going to stay. All of the remaining women stayed. We all wanted to bring our babies home. The 14 of us then began treatment. Apart from numerous injections, it honestly felt like the best holiday I'd ever been on. We were so well cared for. We always had the best food to eat, and massages and therapy whenever we needed it. The staff were amazing. In therapy, we were encouraged to see the health benefits our children were receiving as the future of humanity. We felt good about contributing to a healthy new generation. Every single one of us became pregnant quickly. Regular scans and health checks told us our babies were growing well. I was told I'd be having a girl. I was in bliss, falling in love with my little girl who I had yet to meet. She had strong kicks inside me, so I wanted a strong name for her. I named her Freya. I wondered if she would look like her brother. One night, Claire and I were sitting on the beach beneath the stars. Both our bellies had grown large by this time. I was stroking mine with love, but Claire just stared at hers. She made a grimace as her baby gave her a mighty kick. I could even see the press of his little foot against her stomach. Claire seemed troubled, her usual bright smile replaced by a shadow of doubt. "What's wrong?" I asked her. "Do you ever feel like there's something off about all this?" She responded quietly, her voice barely audible over the waves. "Off? No," I said quickly. But for some reason, I had the intense feeling I was lying. I pushed the feeling away because I didn't want to believe it, not when I was so close to finally holding my daughter in my arms. "Do you understand the specific treatment they've given to us and our babies?" Claire asked. "I'm not a doctor or a scientist," I responded. "I don't understand any of that technical stuff, but I know they know what they're doing. That's all that matters to me. What if there's something, I don't know, wrong with our kids?" Claire asked me, eyes filling with tears. "There's nothing wrong. They've been monitoring them all so closely." I smiled, took her hand in mine, and said reassuringly, "I think it's just nerves. We've all been through so much to get here." Even as I said it, I wasn't sure if I was trying to reassure her or myself. The next day, Claire was in therapy practically the whole day. When she met me for dinner, she had her usual smile back on her face. "You're right, it was definitely just nerves. I don't know what came over me. I forgot how truly lucky I am to be a part of all this. How lucky my child is. Aren't we lucky?" I nodded and gave her a huge hug, squeezing her tightly. We were told that for the safety of us and our babies that delivering a little early by C-section would be best. We received the delivery schedule. Claire was to be first, I was last. I couldn't help but feel angry that I would be the last of us to be able to hold my child. But I reminded myself that I'd probably forget that feeling as soon as Freya was in my arms. The deliveries were to happen over 2 days, 7 one day, 7 the next. I felt extremely restless on the day when Claire and the others were going to have their babies. I couldn't stay still. I decided to go for a walk. I walked and kept on walking. No one stopped me. The staff very, very busy with the deliveries. For some reason, I kept heading north. I don't know what took me there, but eventually I got to the border wall. Coming up against it made me frustrated that I couldn't keep walking. The wall was made of stone and was topped with electric wire. Pretty extreme, I thought. I couldn't help but wonder what was on the other side. At the time, I told myself that I just desperately needed something to distract myself from the agony of waiting to hold my child. But deep down, I think I was actually scared about what information they were keeping from us. I decided to climb a tree. Not easy and pretty stupid considering I was so pregnant. But I was consumed with seeing what was over that wall. I climbed and climbed until I could see row upon row of identical, simple gravestones. "Hello?" I heard the voice echoing up from below the tree. I looked down to see Dr. Hart staring up at me. I hadn't heard her following me. When did she get there? "It's best if you come down now," she said. I climbed down as carefully as I could manage. "What is that over there?" I asked her. "We were told there were dangerous cliffs. But that's not true, is it?" "It's a cemetery," she told me. I never wanted it hidden. But there were those at the Institute who thought our facility would be more peaceful without it in view. Healthier for the mothers. "Who are they? I mean, who are buried there?" I asked her, not really wanting to know the answer. "In our line of work, pushing the boundaries of science and human potential, there are moments of profound loss," she said. "Not every story here has a perfect ending. The individuals memorialized there were part of this journey, just as you are now. They entrusted us with their dreams, their deepest hopes. And though the outcomes were not what we wished, their courage paved the way for the advancements we've made today." I was speechless. I held onto my belly tightly, feeling my daughter stretching inside. "Don't be scared. We are all part of something larger than ourselves here," Dr. Hart continued. "You and your daughter will be fine. We've come a long, long way. Your daughter, she will be perfect." I felt myself start to hyperventilate. "Breathe, breathe, remember to breathe," I heard Dr. Hart say as darkness started to overtake my sight. The next thing I remember, I was waking up in a bed. I was terribly confused and in pain. I felt my belly and I knew my baby was gone. "Where is she?" I shouted out. "Where's my baby? Where's my daughter?" Dr. Hart entered my room. "Shh," she said. "Your baby is fine. We delivered her. She's healthy. You fainted. We decided it was best to move up your delivery to today. But don't worry, everything went well. You and your daughter are perfectly healthy." "My daughter, Freya, can I see her?" I pleaded. "Of course you can," said Dr. Hart. She waved in a nurse who was holding a baby wrapped in a blanket. Freya. When I looked at her, I knew immediately she was mine. She reminded me so much of Oliver. Her little button nose was the same as his, which matched mine also. And she had the same dark hair with soft waves to it. But she was a lot bigger than Oliver. She seemed so much stronger. And her eyes were wide open, taking in everything with total awareness. The nurse asked if I'd like to feed her, passing me a bottle with formula. I asked if I could breastfeed her, but Dr. Hart told me that wouldn't be a good idea. She lifted Freya's lips to show that she had a full row of gleaming pointy teeth. I was shocked. Dr. Hart reminded me that my daughter was given biological advantages to ensure she'd thrive. She then picked up a scalpel and sliced into Freya's little leg. Freya let out a wail. I pulled my baby away from Dr. Hart. "What are you doing?" I screamed at her. "Look," she said. "Your daughter is fine." I looked down to Freya's leg to see the cut had closed. In front of my eyes, it healed. "You will never need to worry about your child being sick or hurt," Dr. Hart said. "She's perfect." I looked down at my daughter. She had stopped crying. Her little wide eyes were now watching me. "Yes, she is perfect," I said. "I love her to the stars and back, and always will." Dr. Hart smiled. We spent Freya's first year on the island with the rest of the Genesis children. That's what we called the children born to us 14. It was a dream. Freya grew quickly. All the children did. They all hit milestones far ahead of schedule. Freya crawled at 2 months, walked at 5, and her first words were eerily articulate for someone barely out of infancy. From her first days, her eyes, full of curious intelligence, seemed to hold more understanding than they should. I marveled at all of her achievements. Claire and I got closer in the year, too. She watched her son, Kian, grow with as much amazement as me. Any worries she had before seemed to be washed away, seeing him laugh and play with his friends. After the first year, Dr. Hart arranged for us all to transition into the real world. Freya and I were placed in a fully furnished apartment. It was beautiful, a dream, really, knowing that was our home. I should have felt comfortable there. But the first night, I couldn't fall asleep. I was super restless. I tossed and turned for hours. I settled myself thinking I was probably just missing the comfort of the island, the family I'd formed between the mothers, children, and staff. Finally, I fell asleep. I dreamt about the island, dreamt about Freya and I in our cottage. But in my dream, I left Freya. I walked away, north, to the cemetery. I got to the wall, and it loomed over me. So I pushed, and pushed, and pushed, until it crumbled. Beyond it were the gravestones. And Mariah. She was standing there, half buried in a grave, and she was staring right at me. I woke with a start. I tried to shake the nightmare of Mariah from my head, but it was almost as if I could hear her voice whispering. I couldn't hear what she said, but it made me remember about what she had said on the island about cameras. I got out of bed and I searched every corner, but couldn't find anything. I felt foolish for looking. We had regularly scheduled health checks with the Institute staff, so they didn't need to be watching us 24/7, I told myself. I went back to bed. Freya thrived. She excelled in school. Almost too much, though. She continued to be placed ahead of her age group. It made it a bit challenging for her to find friends. But she had fun in sports. She joined the swim team and was winning gold medals almost as soon as she started. And she loved painting. I kept in contact with Claire, who lived in the same city as me. Claire noticed that Kian was having challenges making friends too. It made her sad because she remembered how happy he was with the Genesis kids. I made a point of scheduling more play dates so Kian and Freya could hang out. The two got on really well. They were almost like siblings. Freya and I had a wonderful time in her childhood. She'd tell me everything about kids at school, her favorite books, what shape she thought the clouds looked like, and how she wanted to paint them. She'd break into a huge smile when she saw me cheering her on at swim meets. We'd spend hours together, her words flowing like a babbling stream. She trusted me with everything, and I relished every moment with my beautiful, strong, brilliant daughter. Every second with her felt like a miracle. When Freya was around 15, things began to shift. I noticed her temper seemed to flare more if she was hungry. I figured that was a pretty normal teen thing. I didn't think much of it, just prepared myself for perhaps a rocky teen phase, and made sure to stock the fridge well. Then Freya started being obsessed with meat, which was weird because she used to turn her nose up at it. Now it was all she ate. She'd even push away the macaroni and cheese I'd make for her, which used to be her favorite. One day I caught her licking a raw steak. I asked what she was doing, and she just snapped at me. "What? I was hungry." I took the meat away from her and immediately scheduled a health check with the Institute. They did some tests and told me that Freya just needed more iron in her diet. They gave me a strict meal plan for her. They told me to reach out again if anything else changes. I called Claire to see if Kian was having any issues. She told me he just had a health check as well and was given the same diet. She sounded weary. I asked if everything was okay. She confided in me that Kian was having a really hard time at school. He wasn't getting on with the other kids at all, picking fights, which he'd win every time. Claire said it looked like he may be expelled. She said she had talked to the Institute about it. They said that if he couldn't manage public schooling, they would arrange a suitable boarding school for him. I hung up. thankful that Freya's problems weren't so bad in comparison. Freya managed pretty well with her new meal plan. She seemed happy. That made me happy. Then Claire called me one day, sobbing. She said that Kian was gone. Gone? I asked, my heart plummeting into my stomach. My first thought, for some reason, was that when she said gone, that she meant dead. She was that distraught. But no. She explained that something had happened at his school. The institute felt it best to take him and to school him in their private boarding school, where he could be more closely monitored, where his lessons would match his intelligence level better. Claire said that she wasn't able to visit him, just have him for holidays. I told her that if he was having challenges in the regular system, then boarding school would probably be great for him. She agreed. I reminded her that Christmas was just around the corner, and that she'd be able to see him so soon. But then Claire said that she wished they'd keep him for Christmas too. I was shocked. "What do you mean?" I asked her. Then she whispered so quietly I could hardly hear her. "Because I'm scared of him." I tried to reassure Claire that boarding at the institute would help Kian calm down. "They know what they're doing," I said. She said, "Yes, right, of course," and said goodbye. I hung up, feeling rather rattled. I found Freya, who was reading in bed, and kissed her goodnight. That night I had that nightmare again, the one with Mariah in the graveyard. I woke up covered in a cold sweat. I got up out of bed to change and toss my soaked PJs in the wash. Then I noticed Freya's bedroom door was open. I looked in. She was gone. I looked about the apartment. "Freya?" I called out, but there was no answer. I panicked. I ran out into the hall. "Freya!" I shouted. Then I saw her. She was emerging from our neighbor's apartment. "What are you doing?" I asked her. Then she turned to me, and that's when I saw it, the blood. Blood dripping down her mouth. I ran to her. "Freya, what happened? Are you okay?" I asked. Freya looked up at me with a look of almost shock on her face. "I was hungry," she answered plainly. I pushed into our neighbor's apartment to see the body. Bloody. Broken. Chunks of flesh torn from it. I felt Freya grasp my arm tightly. "Mom, I didn't want to kill anyone, I swear," she said. "I was just hungry. Starving. I had to eat." I felt myself begin to hyperventilate. "Mom, breathe," I heard Freya say as darkness clouded my vision. "Please, breathe." The next thing I remember is staff from the institute in my apartment. How and when they got there, I have no idea. But I saw there was still blood on Freya. They told me that they would take care of everything, that Freya needed special monitoring. They told me that she'd be taken care of in their private boarding school. Where Kian is, I managed to get out. Yes, I was told. Actually, Dr. Hart has decided that it will be best for all of the Genesis children to be schooled together from now on. A controlled environment where they can learn to manage their differences. They told me that they would keep in contact. I was so shocked that all I could do was nod. They started to usher Freya to the door. I jumped up. I wrapped Freya in a big hug and told her I loved her, that I would always love her. Then they were gone. Then I just sat there for hours, wondering if what I told my daughter was true. I told her I loved her. How could that be true? She just killed someone, ate them. I was horrified, disgusted. It made my head swim. My beautiful, strong, brilliant daughter is... what? A monster? I puked onto the floor in front of me. But I knew what I said wasn't a lie. I still loved my daughter. And I knew I still wanted to protect her. I trusted that the institute would help her. They knew what they were doing, right? I called Claire and told her that Freya would be joining Kian at the boarding school. I wanted to tell her why, but I found I couldn't. I skirted around the truth, instead telling her that I truly believed they were both in the right place. Staff at the institute gave me updates on Freya. I was told she was taken back to the island with the other Genesis children where a boarding school was set up. I was assured they had the best teachers available. At first, the updates about Freya came regularly. The institute staff told me that she was adjusting well to life among the other children, and Freya would write me letters. We were able to keep up a connection at the beginning. But over time, the updates grew sparse. Then Freya stopped replying to my letters. When I tried to call, the staff were polite but evasive. Eventually, the communication stopped entirely. It had been 2 years since I last saw Freya. It terrified me when I wasn't able to contact anyone. I was desperate for any type of communication. What if Freya was hurt, and I didn't know? What if she was dead? I wanted to go to the island, but I had no idea where it was. Claire urged me to leave it. She said it was best to just let the institute take care of things. She reminded me what I told her. They know what they're doing. Then, the news broke. A staff member from the institute, one of the survivors, she was the one that went to the media. When she was interviewed, I recognized her immediately. Lark. I remember how happy and kind she was welcoming me to the island. Now her face looked haunted. She shared footage of the massacre. I hardly recognized the island when I saw it first. It was no longer an oasis. CCTV footage captured what looked like scenes from a horror film. Bodies of staff members, ripped apart, lay strewn across the grounds. Multiple video angles, all around the facility, all over the gardens. The footage showed Lark cowering by a group of Genesis children pleading for her life. I say, children, because that's how I knew them. But they didn't look like children anymore. They looked like strong young adults in their 20s. But I immediately recognized the person leading the group. It was Kian. I scoured the other faces for Freya, hoping with all my soul I wouldn't see her amongst these faces covered in blood, predator eyes gleaming with the hunt. But she was there. My heart sank when I saw her. But then, at the same time, it lifted. She was alive. My daughter was alive. We will let you deliver the message, Kian told Lark. Humanity has had its time, he said. We are the future. Then Kian turned to speak directly to a CCTV camera. They thought they could control us, he shouted. They thought they were superior because they made us. No, we are stronger, faster, smarter. Humans are below us. Why should we bow to them? Why should we be caged? Those behind him cheered defiantly, including Freya. They all turned and left. Lark, left alive, shook with sobs. The CCTV footage then showed the children getting on boats and leaving the island. The news then showed how the island was swarmed by police and international investigators. Of course, I'm sure you've probably seen all this. Bodies were identified, but Dr. Hart, who had funded the institute, was not among them. There is no evidence of where she could be. All other CCTV footage and institute files appear to have been destroyed. They are currently readying to start an extensive exhumation of the cemetery found on the north part of the island. I've spent day, nights, all waking hours, combing through the news, desperate for any sign of Freya. The attacks have now become widespread. It seems the children have probably split into smaller hunting groups. They strike swiftly, devouring adults, teens, children, anyone they can find. Then they disappear, as if becoming one with the shadows, only to reappear somewhere else when they become hungry again. No one knows where they stay in between attacks. I know everyone is afraid. For my part, I am sorry, but I still love Freya. I can't stop loving my daughter. When I first saw the footage, I, like many of you, I'm sure, ran to lock my door immediately. I was terrified too, but then I unlocked it. Because truthfully, I want my daughter to return to me. I told you I wanted to tell you the truth. My daughter is missing and I want to find her. I want to wrap her in my arms and keep her safe. I love her to the stars and back. I want her to be happy. That's all I've ever wanted. That's what a good mother does, right? And I'll be completely honest with you now because I hate telling a lie. I'm not sure what lengths I will go to make sure she's happy. But I want to make sure good people aren't hurt, killed, eaten. Not when there are bad people out there. If my daughter needs meat, needs blood, there's no reason for her to feed on good people. I don't want you to be eaten. I promise you that. Because you're good people, right? Right. I know you are. My daughter is missing. But I don't want you to find her. I can find more suitable food for her, I promise.